without further ado, let's welcome John to the stage.
Wow, smooth and silky voice. I just hope and pray that was recorded, because I want to have my family hear that, as opposed to annoying and strident voice, which is, I think, typically how it's characterized. Thank you for that. Clearly, if you're talking to a group like this, you got to have a selfie. So I'm going to do this. Well, there's going to be two. So for those of you over here, make sure you're, show some interest, some love to USCOTS. Ready? Here we go. Jack, you had your eyes closed. Yeah, so we'll go to the middle here. Ready? Yeah, okay, and then have love to the right. Ready? Here we go. Thank you. That's I just wanted to have evidence that I could show also that people would actually stay after dinner and hear me say something. I think that my obligation, I'm going to be the Tums of your experience for this dinner. It'll settle your stomach and get you ready for the rest that will follow. Again, it's just such a treat to be here. It's so fun to see humans at a conference. And you're not little squares, and it's just such a nice opportunity. So it's a joy to be here with you. So I'm gonna, I like to walk around, so I'm gonna have to do that. And I can't see my screen, the stuff from up there, so I'll be down here probably some, and I'm gonna trip over someone's feet before this is over. So I want to give some thanks, and one, obviously I want to thank, the folks that invited me. Although I will take issue, with the challenge that they gave me. So here it is. Make it non-technical, somewhat light, ideally thought-provoking, and with the potential to impact people's teaching. And oh, by the way, you have 20 minutes. I thought we were friends. Yeah, So thanks for that challenge. And for those of you that are here, it's been 12 hours since you started this, and you're still hanging in there. So I'm so happy that you're here to join me and just talking about stuff that I enjoy and that you enjoy. The world that we live in and the world we work in is something that's been a pleasure. I also want to thank the generations of students who've taught me. I'm much better at talking to a group than I was when I first started. When I first started, I would have been petrified to look here at this group of people. Even if I did the trick of trying to imagine the audience naked, there's too many, and I wouldn't want to do that anyway. It's just not appropriate. But I can tell you my first experience as a teaching assistant, and for some of the grad students here, you may recognize this, that I had trouble speaking. I stood up in front of a group, and it was like my brain had disconnected. And it was hard to do that, and my students helped me become better. And I had colleagues and mentors that did as well. I've had the joy of being involved in a podcast for 10 years. And I've had many of my podcast guests have taught me so much about the importance of communication, and particularly a focused communication where you have a constraint in time and a constraint in the space in which you're doing it. And I have guests that I saw here. So Regina was a guest, a while ago, and also she was a co-moderator last summer when Rosemary was away. So I've learned a lot from my colleagues that have participated and the guests that have joined us. And I want to thank all of you. I want to thank you for what you do and the fact that you have this kind of commitment to do better for the students in your classes and the experience that they have learning statistics. When I started out in this biz, if I said, what is it that you teach? If you were asked that question at a party, you know how fast someone would leave when you said you taught statistics? It was like, oh, well, they would walk away. And it's changed. It's changed in part because of the way you approach this. Yeah, maybe some. It depends on your audience. Yeah, right. So it depends. You may go to better parties than I went to, so that may be part of the issue. And I also want to give a shout out to the American Statistical Association that joined us as a sponsor. And then also my university and the Department of Statistics and the Department of Media, Journalism, and Film. Because this has been a partnership with journalists right from the start. And I think that's been to our advantage. And I point out here my colleague, the one to the left is Richard Campbell, who I started this with, and to the right is Rosemary Pennington, who's my current partner in crime in this process. So she's the co-panelist with me, the moderator, and also she's just a brilliant voice. She worked in public radio before she came into academia, and I've learned a tremendous amount from her. I will mention that I'm committed to stealing boldly from good models. And I'll tell you, the inspiration in part when I was thinking about this and building out the podcast was, well, if you've listened to NPR and Car Talk, Click and Clack, the Tappet Brothers, are any of you familiar with that? Okay, so that was a lot of fun, and what I really liked about it was there was technical content presented in a way that was engaging and interesting to a community. That's a huge success. That's an aspiration. The folks that did Freakonomics were a wonderful example of an economist and a journalist. So you have the substantive content person who's a behavioral economist. So it has, you scratch a little bit deep and you say statistics. So you have that type of person paired with the journalist. And lastly, Science Friday is truly one of the gems of science communication. Of course, when they have $20 million a year to produce a product, you should be. I'm going to give, I felt like with a group of educators, I had to have some learning outcomes. So one of the things that I hope at the end of this talk is maybe you'll have a framework for thinking about how you might use some news and framing of news as part of exercises in your classes. And maybe you'll have an assignment that might be connected to it. That's what I hope. Here's the outline. We're going to start with a pretest. Maybe you do want the Tums now. Then I'm going to tell you the takeaway, because in the spirit of not burying the lead, I'm going to try to give you a little bit of background. Then I'll talk, somehow I've come to think about statistics and journalism. I'm going to then share with you some ideas about how you might think about deconstructing the news. I looked at my title and I thought, man, I'm not sure I'd want to come to this talk. It could have picked a better title. But you stayed, so thank you. You put up with a title, and I know there was food, so I was grateful for that. And then I'm going to talk about contests. And you may have seen that I had posted, that we had up on the screen when you were eating, that there is a contest that the podcast is sponsoring. You still have a month to enter. It's a data visualizations, data story contest. So we have about 280 episodes of data that you can now explore and play with and submit. And that's an open invitation. All right, so here are the rules for the multiple choice. You're going to be given an image prompt. Associated with this image prompt, you're going to be asked you're going to have to do some work with it. It's multiple choice. By the way, you won't get to go back. I mean, unlike one of those cruel computer exams. The other thing is you will be graded subjectively and maliciously. So just accept that I did use a random grade generator through most of my career, so I figured I might as well continue it now. And don't even think about going to the bathroom. You should have done that before we started. No, if you do, go ahead. It's all right. Okay. So, are you all ready? Okay. The first image. Now, remember it's multiple choice. You may have to write down your answers. Just so, as you look at this, the first A is an early thermometer. B, a device to teach significant digits in scientific notation. An energy-efficient calculator. Both B and C, oh, is that my phone? Do I need to take that? And you're thinking maybe it is time for me to go. No, you stay here. Don't leave. And the last option is 42. Okay, so this is really you're gonna have to nerd out on some of these responses. I'm just telling you, because does anyone know where 42 comes from? Yeah, okay, so there you go. So Hitchhiker's Guide. So there you go. So that's the answer. You're going to have to figure out what the questions will be for the rest of this talk. Okay, here's your second prompt. Okay, so this is either A. You did write your answer for the first one, right? So this is a portable eye chart. The bookmark for all the cool math and computer science majors. None of the above. Both A and B. 42. You know, we'll see how good you are at pattern recognition here in a question or two. Okay? Now, this is a reason for teachers of large lecture classes to rediscover sidewalk chalk. I did, by the way, as a you know. An early device to differentiate between stat teachers and math teachers. Neither A nor B. Both A and B. A given B. B given A. And 42. Let's see if ChatGPT can take this test. All right, so by the way, I will tell the graduate students here, this was the one piece opportunity where I got advice about being a lab instructor. And I will share, I mean, it is a teaching conference, and I feel like I need to give at least one piece of pedagogical wisdom that I learned. And this was, the wisdom was this. When you're erasing a blackboard, erase it up and down instead of back and forth so your butt doesn't go back and forth. That was the extent of my teacher prep. And you know what? I remembered it. It was really resonant as advice, you know? So up and down. Now, how many of you are going to do this from this point on, you know? Whether it's, and it works for whiteboards just as well as blackboards. All right, so there we go. Now, next up, so have you got your answers? You've been writing them down? Okay, good. So this is the next one. Okay, now, you may think that it was a prototype for Daleks. Exterminate. Yeah, okay, so now we go to another science fiction touchstone for many of us. An early device to different. Wait, that's the same. Oh, it is also a differentiator. It was. Wait, I told you the answer. Yeah, no, I didn't. I told you it won't possible. Insomnia cure at professional conferences in the 1990s. None of the above. A and B but not C, B and C but not A and B and C. Why I hate multiple choice exams. And lastly, there you go. Yes. All right. So now, by the way, when I was doing this, I had such fun doing this that I would say, oh, this is great. And, you know, my family's just shaking their head. You know, what are you doing? I said, oh, you won't believe, this is going to be a lot of fun. And they're going, they didn't believe it. All right. So here's the fifth question. And these, you know, you have to suspend disbelief because I did actually cut and paste these. But you can imagine, I do get a hard copy of this type of device, this material. And so, you know, is this a songbird sanitation supply device? Materials? A puppy trainer? A source of accountability for local public officials? All of the above? None of the above? 42. Okay, are you ready? Now you're going to be on your honor. This is low stakes pre-test work. So there's not going to be consequences for your answers. I mean, it was mainly to see about you being engaging in the material and considering what it might mean. I actually had to get Alan and Kelly to promise not to look because I didn't want them to you know, be able to cheat. And they did. They were very good. So these are the answer keys, and it's D, B, D, F, D, and then you also see that the last answer was acceptable. So if you know, how could you argue with the answer to life, the universe, and everything? So it's hard to reject that as a possible answer. So congratulations if you've gone through the test and you can figure out where you ended up. But those are some images, and by the way, almost all those images were things that I took. I had the punch cards still kicking around that I did use as a bookmark. The overhead projectors were from a hall that when we were getting rid of them at some point, I had taken a picture as record. So these things are familiar for those of us that have been in teaching for a while. And I'm sure that you're going to see something similar as your careers evolve. You know, what's going to be your punch card or your overhead projector? It could be an interesting journey. You know, by the way, I'm going to ask one last question before I do this, and this is a bonus question. If it says Miami University in Ohio, where are the other Miami universities? There isn't a Miami University in Miami, Florida. Miami was a university before Florida was a state. So the question is, and this is the take-home part of the quiz. Figure out why Miami University is called Miami University in Ohio, the one that's in Ohio. So that's it. I'm not going to be defensive. You know, not anymore. You've hurt my feelings. So that's where we're going to just to give you a sense of what that might be. And you know, there's one Miami alum or two that knew that answer. Okay, so here I'm going to talk about the summary and, you know, not burying the lead. And you know, I froze my butt off here the last 2 nights. And you know, one thing that you find, if you're dancing around on a stage, you get warmed up. You know, so just as an FYI, for those of you that are starting to get cold, if you want to get up and dance around, I would understand. Okay, so here we go. Summary. Statistics are plot elements. I didn't think that. I used to think statistics were enough to convince people of something. I don't believe that. Story convinces. Statistics supports. Statistics are plot elements. It's sobering to think that most people will have one exposure to statistics in their careers. One. They will consume news and quantitative information for the rest of their lives, but most are only going to have one. That places a huge burden on us. Maybe burden is wrong. That's negative. It's an opportunity. But it causes me. I will own my feelings. It leads me to think, what is it that should be accomplished if I know that I'm only going to see a student for one semester? And I think that's so I would ask you all to reflect on that. I really think we need to, given that people are going to be using news as a source for the rest of their lives, how do you leverage that in your classes? What are the opportunities to do that? I mentioned here a supplemental observation, which Sander van der Linden is a cognitive psychologist that just wrote the book Foolproof. He talks a lot about pre-bunking as part of helping people develop to be inoculated from misinformation. Are there ways that we can think about our STAC classes as providing similar opportunities to pre-bunk for information? And then I have 2 bonus observations. One, have any of you heard of Parker Palmer? Any of you know? Parker Palmer he's a really interesting guy. And he was at Earlham College for a while and other places. And he came and visited a faculty learning community when I was just starting out in the university biz. And he said that the role that we have in teaching is to create a space where students can learn. And I have loved that quote for the rest of my career. Since I heard that, I thought about what is it that we do to create this space? What does that mean and what does that look like? And I find that still gives me chills, and I can't believe I'm saying that, you know. But it's still, I can't believe I'm saying that, because it really is a pretty powerful thing to imagine that you create this environment and space where people can learn and succeed. And lastly, you got to get attention. You got to get people's hearts before you can get their heads. And so what is it that you can do? And I think we've heard some ideas here, like the edutainment stuff is kind of, you know, warming up the heart to help then engage head as well. So there are things that we can talk about with that. So let me tell you a little bit of an origin story. So I was involved in a faculty learning community talking about quantitative literacy. And we ultimately were saying, what would that look like? And one aspect of that was Richard Campbell was part of this journalism professor, and they said, we need to have proof of concept that a humanities course could have a significant quantitative literacy component. And Richard said, and these are his words, I'm willing to be the humanist canary in the quantitative coal mine. Those are his words in describing this. And what we did is we ended up proposing and developing and team teaching a news and numbers class. So that's how we started thinking about this and collaborating. We said we can't do this forever, but we said we can think about other models. We could think about, podcasts, and it was still, 2012 was about the time at the end of that, we were developing it and starting to think about rolling it out. What would that look like? And we had on campus a public radio station that was now kind of, it wasn't really active. It had been merged into others, kind of the hit of deficits that impacted lots of public radio. But we said, well, we've got this great space. There were engineers still part of the media journalism and film department, so we could build this out. And we started. And our first episode included Jim Albert, who does work in sports statistics, for those of you that know this. Tommy Wright was our second guest, who's a census person. And his episode was, we titled it, What Does the Census Do the Other 9 Years? And part of it, that's what you wanted. You wanted to have kind of that sort of reaction of smile and engagement, just to get, to try to get people to connect. We then had Rosemary join us in 2016, and you'll notice that's about episode 23, and you'll notice in those 3 years we just did 20 some episodes, and part of it was a lot of work. We were doing everything in person, and we started to figure out we can do some things virtually. And in 2017 we did. We started with a different model, the stats and short stories. The stats and stories is about 28 minutes plus or minus. Short stories is 7 to 12, give or take, with some variation. And we also were very fortunate to have the ASA join us as a co-sponsor. And it was about the time Barry Nussbaum was president of ASA, as one of his initiatives was to this. Barry had been the chief statistician for the US EPA. And so he had this really strong perspective of the importance of communicating quantitative information in statistical agencies. And beyond, and obviously beyond in terms of our world. So that's where that started. And the little graph there to the right is showing you those first 4 points are before we had ASA sponsorship. And then all of a sudden, with a little bit of help, we go from 8 plus or minus into the teens, ultimately into the close to 50 in recent years with their support. And then we hit the 100th episode in 2019. 2021 was 200th and so on. And then this year, 2023, we're going to hit the 300th. And we ultimately wrote a book that was motivated and inspired by this collaboration. So Rosemary and I did this. And so it was great fun. Now, when I think about statistics, my colleagues were teaching this, and Regina mentioned this morning, so I had to change some of I had to add to my slides. It's both great and really scary when you're thinking, oh crud, I really need to make that better as a consequence. So what I said, Regina talked about, the story from the data, but the quote that my colleagues from journalism like to say is to make the significant interesting. I like that. Nick Kristof talked about, that the report should have numbers and data, but the story is what grabs you. The others are the supporting information. And that's a different way to think about what we do. And journalism put facts in context. And that's something that Rosemary would say that she really works towards in her classes. The job for the statistician, Regina mentioned the signal from noise detection, but I would also argue that those things that I've highlighted is our job too. We also want to make sure that we're communicating these things in such a way. One of my early conversion experiences in terms of thinking about the message that journalists might have for us. Have any of you ever seen the book News and Numbers? Does anybody know that book? There are a few. It's brilliant. I mean, in essence, it was a book of what are the kind of questions that a journalist should be asking about scientific studies. But ultimately, I ended up using it as the questions that my students should be prepared to answer if they're involved in doing studies. So it's a thinking about their information in a way that's going to be communicated to a broader audience. And so I ended up using that as part of what I did. Ultimately, it played out in kind of what led to the story, which was the title of my talk tonight, which was Deconstructing the News. And this deconstructing the news was with an eye towards saying, what is a news story and what do you need to understand it? I almost think of it as just-in-time statistics and journalism teaching given a framing. So if you know something about a process, a story is written, then an editor will often put a headline on it. So you might want to think about what's a headline, then as you go into it, you dive in a bit, say what's the story, what's the evidence that the story brings in. And you know, what I put here are some framing of this, of kind of the way that we ended up talking about these questions. And, you know, Maxine talked a little bit about this last night in the 5-minute talk about how they've worked on framing kind of these questions to query a system. If you look at David Spiegelhalter's work, you look at Tim Harford's work, you know, those are all great resources for thinking about it. But you know, you got to find something that resonates. And what resonated for me was thinking about what are you meeting in the paper, what's claimed, who's claiming it, why is it claimed, what evidence supports the claim. So it was thinking about the claims as being, you know, what do you think about? And are you changed as a consequence of this? So this was some of what we talked about, you know, and does it fit in with what's already known and so on. So those are the questions. And I'll steal a little bit of my own thunder in terms of talking about how you might use this. You could have students do this with a story that you find. You could control by selecting the story, or you could leave it open-ended for them to select the story. So this is an opportunity to think about a framing. I give a little example here. We looked at series binge watching. So we ended up finding things that we thought were interesting that could be a story to consider, and something that we would hope would be of broader appeal. And I'll tell you, in terms of series binge watching, I know that I missed the last episode of Ted Lasso, which was coming out this week on Wednesday, coming here. So I have, you know, I wasn't binging. I was watching it one at a time. But again, I understand why you would think about this type of binging. But what was interesting is there were all these data sources that were cited. Everything from a Netflix study to a government survey to a presentation at a meeting to interviews with clinicians who may or may not have studied this from the perspective of people engaging in media and seeing how it would work. So the story is, you know, what's about binge watching? How do you alleviate stress? What are the pointers for responsible binge watching? That's kind of what they did. And we talked about, I already mentioned the multiple data sources. And the idea, now here's where you start talking as an instructor. Hey, what do you think about these different sources? This government survey is pretty well defined. The American Time Use Survey, have any of you ever seen that? Like, how do you spend your time? You know, and that's kind of giving this baseline of what does watching look like. I mean, what does it mean to binge watch? You know, I mean, you all have a sense of that, but how is that? That has to be defined in a consistent way, and you have to have data to support that. So there's those types of issues. And you know, there were quotes from experts, but as you looked at the experts, you might think, do they know anything about you know, are they clinical psychologists in general practice? Or are they someone dealing with people that have been kind of hyper-focused and engaged with media and binging? So, you know, these are all the questions that I'm posing here, and I got to stop hitting the mic, is that, you know, by the way, if you ever have anything sobering, this is another parenthetic aside, have you ever had your class videotaped? If you ever do that, you know how you think you sound funny when you listen to a recording? If you watch yourself and you're flapping as you're doing it, you know, it's really kind of, it's pretty telling. Okay, so back on script. Okay. So then the idea of why was this covered? Why was this newsworthy? Why does it even get to your eyeballs? And part of it is the story here of that it's kind of novel and it's current. You know, people are thinking about binging. They're seeing how programs are released. I mean, this is part of the way we consume shows anymore. So, you know, I won't. The claiming here was by an NBC News writer who was talking about these various concerns, and you know that I've mentioned these claiming habits about what was the sources of these data, and I'm not going to belabor this because you're going to be able to get access to the slides, and it's also after dinner on a 12-hour conference day. So I know better than to abuse you in this context. I would highlight some things that you have chances to talk about. There's certain information probably is more trustworthy than others. You know, that's kind of an opportunity to raise that when you start looking at stories like this. That coding matters. How many times if you're teaching something about an analysis, if you have just goofy defined things that are not well defined, that are not being able to code in a consistent way, it's nonsense. So thinking about measurement becomes a big part of a story that you might tell. The other parts, well, there's sampling variability, error, the margin of error. I already mentioned kind of why the study was conducted, and also the component of what the experts and why they support, why you would believe it. So again, here's the possible class assignments I would mention. The first one was maybe get an article for students to conduct a similar exercise of doing this type of decomposing of what is told in a story like that they're reading into these constituent parts. What are the statistical ideas you need to understand it? I've also added a second class assignment, and this goes back to something Dennis and I had talked about many years ago. This is a podcast that has almost 300 episodes on it. Is there a lesson plan here that might involve one of them? Yes, I believe, I've been working on this for 10 years, so clearly it's something I believe and invest in. But I think it has value that you might find for your classes. So I would just say, well, how might you use it? And I would welcome the insights of a community of educators thinking about how to use information such as this. So now, but I'm going to, oh shit, I'm running, 5 more minutes, okay. Yeah, plus or minus 20. So I will quickly, I'm sorry, I will quickly. So we also did contests. And one contest was the Better Bayes contest, where we were saying this, Carrie Mangerson, brilliant statistician in Australia, does a lot of work with ecological applications, data science applications. She's an officer of ISI now, just outstanding colleague. So she joined us. She was talking about jaguar corridors and citizen science data. And we were talking about Bayesian stuff, and we said, does the public understand this? Do your students understand this? And so we did the Better Bayes contest, and you were asked they had to present a headline and then a lead sentence. And just like many students, no one actually did what we asked them to do. They all got a headline, a headline, but they ended up with multiple sentences, and they were really good. I won't go through them given time. I will tell you that the winner, though, did neither. They submitted a haiku. So Steve Ziliak did this. Bayesian methods, making stuff you partly know, link that with what you don't. Frequentist methods fear the null hypothesis and large p-values. It pays to go Bayes, epistemologically obvious and prior. What fun! Are you going to assign a haiku for your class? We heard a limerick earlier. Certainly you could do both. We did the meme median mode contest. That was Ninka Kroll was one of the winners. Statisticians be like, why can't you just be normal and the data screams? The other winner was Eric Daza, who had this sense of, intuition causing the car to veer off the highway of correlation onto the exit ramp of causation. What about an assignment where you would have something like a meme contest in your classes? We did My Headline is Better as the 250th episode. In this case, was Seattle air quality among worst in the world. Well, it was also at a time when Seattle had a tremendous number of forest fires. There was all the, so essentially what you were seeing was a consequence of something that was clearly missing in this headline. And the winning headline was Wildfires Diminish Seattle's Air Quality. Another assignment that you could possibly consider. The current contest is here. You've got, if you go to statsandstories.net/contest, you can get access to it. And, I will wrap up with saying that I see news stories as a foundation for motivating just-in-time instruction and statistics, that headlines and these deconstruction with highlights are great. Contests are wonderful. I'm just a fan of doing this as a way of making it fun to engage a broader community. It's kind of in the spirit of fun, but with a competitive dimension. And if you enter the contest, the 300th contest for the data viz, there'll be a subset selected that'll be voted on by the general community. So that'll be fun. So, as I get to this point, let me close with my own haiku. Projector darkens. Stat teachers embrace talk's end. Summer has arrived. So thank you.